today I'm going to be watching this video. It's called Why Do Australians Have Strange Accents? And I know what you're going to say. That is very rich coming from this accent. Someone recommended this and said it's actually not too much about it being strange. It's more like a history of the Australian accent. So interested to see this. Obviously, I've seen some videos on Australian slang, but I've not really learned too much about the origins of the accent or the language itself. So interested to see this. You can tell me what you think.
Did you know that Britain has more regional accents per square mile than any country on the planet?
I mean, that one straight away I can imagine. I always think that, especially living in different countries and speaking to people from a lot of different countries, there doesn't seem to be many variances in specific countries compared to UK, where the landmass is relatively small compared to a lot of other countries, and it feels like every town you go to has like a very distinct accent. Even just thinking about that, in Australia, is there differences between like the Sydney accent, Melbourne accent, or even like the smaller towns and so on? I know there's like the different levels of Australian accent, like going from like the posh to the kind of more working class or that sort of thing. But is there geographical variances in language or accent in Australia?
Yes, it does. And the reason I'm going to tell you this, well, I think it's very interesting, is because I've just been chatting to a pair of Australians here in Canterbury, Kent. This is the famous Canterbury Cathedral where Thomas à Becket was murdered in 1170. I think it was 1170. Google it. The video's not about him. It's about accents. And I was talking to these Australians who knew me from Antiques TV shows and YouTube, in fact. Thank you for following. And I said to them, I love your accent. And they said, oh, thank you very much. I said, where does your accent come from? And they said, what do you mean, where does it come from? We're Australian. I said, yes, but how did your accent develop into that Australian accent? They had no idea. They'd never even thought about it. Probably rightly so, why would you? But I researched it for my book. Here it is, A Bash with the British Empire. So if it's in here, it's got to be true. And I discovered that the Australian accent was first noted in 1820, and the authorities there at the time were bemused by this accent that the colonial children were coming out with. And so they looked into it and they deduced that this Australian accent was a mix of all the British accents in one, and it had never been heard
That makes sense.
in Britain before, and there's a very good reason for that. Because the accent had developed with English, Irish, Scottish and Welsh peoples all being put together in little townships in Australia. Now, this accent had never developed in Britain because these peoples ordinarily would never meet one another ever if they remained in Britain. So it was only when they got to Australia did they meet for the very first time. And so when you put people from Edinburgh, Dublin, London and Glasgow together, then within a generation or two, their accents mix, and the children of the settlers, the colonials, the children of these people develop a new accent. It would happen today. And this was noted in Australia for the very first time, the Australian accent. The same can apply to, of course, the New Zealanders in 1820.
That's awesome, man. I mean, it's like almost like the simplest explanation would just be the one. Like, I just never considered that. It makes complete sense. Because you do think, I've thought before, like, yeah, it's like a lot of British people went to Australia. I mean, Britain colonised it and there was a lot of British people that went there. So you think they'd have like a British accent, but there's no sort of standard British accent. But yeah, the combination of all the people from all these places making an Australian accent, that's actually very interesting to think about. It's like, for instance, my son goes to like an international school with a mixture of our like other classmates who are from a lot of different countries. So I always wonder like what his accent's going to sound like. Is it going to sound like me, his mum? Is it going to sound like a mixture of his classmates and stuff? It'll be probably quite unique in itself. But yeah, the Aussie accent is just a combination of all the British accents. I guess that's what it is. But and I guess it's probably developed since then into something else as well. But tell me what you think about that. And did you already know that? I guess it's probably common knowledge in Australia, but I just never considered it. Thanks.